I wasn't quite sure what Michael was going to say, and I thought he'd probably cover all the bases, and there wouldn't be much left to say after that. So I thought, well, what I might do, which is quite useful at the beginning of the day, is think about the language that we use and to think some of the things that the corporates say, because I've been spending my life since I first met Tim battling food companies, trying to hold them to account, taking them to task. And the language they use and the language I want to use differs. And of course that language does shape the way in which we think, shapes our arguments, frames the way in which we can put forward our thoughts and our activities and our advocacy. I work for an advocacy organization, the World Obesity Federation. It used to be known as the International Obesity Task Force, and then became the International Association for the Study of Obesity. Basically, it's an umbrella organization. We have about 50 member organizations in countries around the world, but we're based here in London. Before that, I worked at the old Food Commission, along with Tim and others way back. So we go back a way. And food corporations, indeed, are part of the meat of our actions for most of our careers, how we enjoy fighting them. Okay, so let me say a few things about what's often called big food, the corporates, the big ones that work multinationally across borders. They're large, they're well-resourced, they sell highly processed products, and I'll come back to that. The products are strongly promoted. There's an awful lot of marketing done. A lot of the budget, a lot of the cost of the food that you buy is rediverted back into promoting it again so that you want to buy it again. And products, of course, are branded because there's no point trying to sell apples at a profit if someone else can sell apples just the same. What you want to do is sell something that only you can identify. So you sell a Mars bar because it's a Mars bar and it's different to any other confectionery. Branding something, Coca-Cola, branding is very important to corporates. Michael showed you that sort of corporate map with all the brands around it, very useful. These are sort of a nudge to the same things. They're colourful, they're instantly recognisable, they're very cleverly designed. Don't just think these are names, these are very well thought out brands. So that's big food. And they will tell you that they are not like tobacco because we all have to eat, we all need food. So we shouldn't be treating them like big tobacco, which has long been demonized, not only here, of course, but across the world. World Health Organization even talks about big tobacco. World Health Organization has recently talked about big food and big alcohol as being huge challenges that governments have to face, and that we haven't solved our obesity crisis because we have failed to tackle the big food corporations. And that's not my words, those are the words of Margaret Chan, the Director General of the World Health Organization. It is important that governments understand the nature of corporates and see, if they have a public health responsibility, that corporates may be undermining them. But the companies will tell you they are part of the solution because they provide food. They are not like tobacco. And I think we have to sort of ask ourselves, are they really part of the solution, or are they just as much a part of the problem as big tobacco can be? Firstly, I would challenge you to identify quickly products from these companies that we actually need. Well, I'm counting. Okay, it's not easy. Some of them are European or further overseas. But if you start with Burger King, Coca-Cola, Mars, Nestle, and so on, it's actually quite hard to think of things that these companies produce that we really need to eat. So I would argue that, in fact, perhaps big food is the wrong word, and we should think of some other word for them. Let me just say that what are big food products? Well, they are usually not products that you find on these sort of nationally recommended food-based dietary guidelines. Guidelines produced by expert committees for governments or produced by WHO. Here's one for Malaysia. It's mostly healthy stuff. I don't see any branded products there for a start. Australian Guide to Health Eating, similarly, very few brands available there. They do mention a few down there, but they say only small amounts. That's one from Sri Lanka, full of fruits and vegetables, quite a lot of carbohydrates, but nothing branded, nothing particularly recommended that you call what we would generally call unhealthy food. So food-based dietary guidelines aren't promoting the same things that the corporates are promoting. In fact, you can find hundreds of these food-based dietary guidelines. Go browsing on the web. There are loads and loads. And 201, they do not have branded material on them. They do not have the snacks, confectionery, soft drinks, and so on that the big companies are promoting. So that's a huge difference, and I think we have to bear that in mind. The big corporates are not producing the stuff that's highly recommended, that we should be eating more of, the fruits, vegetables, lean meat, fish. The big corporates are producing the stuff that we're recommended to eat less of. So I would argue perhaps it isn't big food, but big snack.
Very good. Yeah.
Not essential to health. Often these are processed snacks that are eaten between meals, reduce your appetite for healthier foods, or actually replace meals, a fast food meal. And so I'd argue that almost from first principles, these are not companies that are part of the solution. And that they are part of the problem, and they're particularly part of the problem because they claim to represent food suppliers. They claim to represent the whole sector. And that's really dangerous because when you get to a place like World Health Organization where they bring in stakeholders, quotes, to come and advise on how their policies can be implemented, the people they bring in, the Food and Beverage Alliance, are the companies along the bottom. They can afford to hold Geneva offices and have delegates waiting to be called in and so on. The big corporates are there, putting their hand up and saying, we're stakeholders, we produce food, we should be consulted. You never see a stallholder for fruit and veg at WHO. You never see a farmer, as far as I know, down at WHO. So I would argue that they actually displace real food producers in the policy process and capture the policy process. Michael mentioned voluntary measures might be faster and more efficient than regulatory measures. I'm a great believer that regulations are in fact public goods and that we should be increasing regulation, not trying to cut red tape. There's another bit of language that we can argue with. And that voluntary actually means non-binding. It means that they can go back on their word. So, for example, Campbell's Soup issued press releases 2 years ago saying they were going to reduce the salt in their soup. And they got quite a lot of good publicity for the health measures. This is going to be good for our consumers. We believe that it's important that we should be reducing salt. Now, soup is, of course, one of the major vehicles for salt in our diet. Quietly, about 6-8 months ago, Campbell's reintroduced the salt in their soup. They had to admit it at their AGM that actually the recipes had reverted and they were going to re-offer, I love that word offer, clients, consumers, their high salt products. They went back on their word. It's easy for them to go back on the word. It was not a binding promise. It was a voluntary measure, and they've wound it back. Nutrition labelling. Well, you know what our government recommends. It recommends these nice traffic lights. And you know what the companies recommend. They like doing these numbers, which are pretty useless if you're sort of under age 6 or illiterate, innumerate, as a large number of adults are, in fact. Can't use that. Or you even get companies like this happens to be Tesco 5 years ago, producing those numbers with colours. And you think, oh, that's helpful, maybe the colours can be used. But no, those colours are actually irrelevant to health. They're pink because it's a sugar, not whether it's high or low. It's yellow because it's salt. So that was completely sort of counter colour coding. Designed, I think, as sabotage. But done, you know, Tesco will tell you this is for to help consumers. Actually, to be fair on Tesco, they are now changing their mind. They're going towards colour coding in the government regulated way, government proposed but voluntary way. Voluntary, limited marketing to children. Companies have made an EU pledge. In fact, they've made pledges all around the world, but they've made a pledge in the EU that they will restrict their marketing to children. And we've been following exactly how their pledges have been put into operation. And of course, yes, they have restricted it. And in fact, here in the UK with legislation, companies are not advertising so much on children's television. But my word, they've squashed it there and they've expanded it elsewhere. They've expanded it in adult television or family viewing, So in fact, just as many children are seeing just as many, if not more, ads now than they were before for junk food. And of course, they're going outside of TV anyway, because TV is quite expensive, and moving into things like advert games. This is Kellogg's site where you can go and games and fun and play lots of games. It's very child-oriented. Kellogg's is a signatory to the EU pledge. Kellogg says it does not advertise to children under 12. How did they get away with this? Answer, this is not advertising, says Kellogg's. They don't call it advertising because they're not putting a sales message in there. They're not telling anyone to buy it. And therefore, technically, it is not advertising. In my view, any branded message is an advertisement. But in their view and their definitions of what is advertising, it isn't. So they're the little loopholes, fruit loopholes that they get in. Wonderful. Oh, and just another bit of language. Some of these companies say they're not food companies anymore. Nestle, the biggest food company, says it is now a nutrition, health and wellness company. So there's a nice bit of language for you. So they're neither a big food or big snack, are they? They're big health and big wellness. Patty will tell you all about them later. Okay, a bit more language. How are we doing? Yeah, okay. Michael mentioned their focus on consumers and noted that although they will tell you that we only sell what people want and we couldn't survive if we didn't, and that we respond to consumer demand, they do indeed shape demand. And this is hardly a new idea. We had the excellent book from Vance Packard, 1956, so 60 years ago next year? Okay, coming up to 60. So he was doing the research 60 years ago this year. We've known for a long time how companies can manipulate their customers or create customers. And indeed, this predates Vance Packard by quite a long time, using popular images, cartoon characters on foods. So does the wonderful. The invention, basically, of Father Christmas in this sort of format is largely down to Coca-Cola's way of advertising it. It's just extraordinary. Coca-Cola also promises it won't advertise to children, but it is still using a Father Christmas Santa Claus image. But it's using others too. For example, the polar bear down here, and it's Pepsi's got its, God knows what that person is. And more importantly, they're going on Facebook and Twitter. This isn't just TV advertising. This is getting to kids directly through the social media. It's very hard to get figures for advertising revenue. It's even harder to get figures out of the government for how much they're spending on health promotion for eating healthily, although we do have a budget now for the Change for Life thing. But back in 2004, the government actually published its own report, the Choosing Health report, with this graph in it, very nice graph of 743 million being spent to promote food of all types, and soft drinks and chain restaurants, fast food, and government expenditure the following year of 7 million. Well, that's a ratio of about 100 to 1, or put it another way, the government spends in a year what the industry is spending every 3 days promoting their products. So, okay, another bit of the power imbalance that needs to be taken into account. And their language about advertising and marketing, they are spending a huge amount. It's the way in which they can regenerate our consumption. We know what it looks like. I won't spend time on this one. That's for kids. But we also have to think not just about packaging and TV advertising and internet marketing, social media and so on, but actually the design of food itself. Here's something that we would recommend people, children particularly, to consume more of. This is how the industry interprets that. It takes fruit flavors, it takes the sugars, it takes the colors and puts them into those sort of products, or those sort of products, or these sort of products. I'm back on Fruit Loops again. I better think of another company or I'll get sued. But it's that way in which something that in nature is very attractive gets extracted, reinterpreted and produced and given to you in a format that isn't as healthy, indeed is very unhealthy. And companies know how they can market. They know about pester power. If you can see the bottom of the screen, this is the child tugging its parents' hand holding the shopping basket, I want. And this is an advert by Bernard Matthews themselves, who were making those products way back in 1995. It was published in the Grocer magazine because this was aimed at retailers. It wasn't aimed at the public. It's not you and I want to see this. The retailers are being convinced by Bernard Matthews that they should stock these things because of Pester-Power. Now, the companies went in front of the Select Health Committee several years later and swore blind that they'd never use Pester-Power because they thought that would be quite unethical. Retailers, they also know how to sell. I won't go into details here, but abundance increases purchase. Variety increases purchase. End of aisle increases purchase. And putting it down on the floor, that's an interesting one. That's the floor on the left there, and these are confectionery way down at, well, I can't reach that level without a good deal of effort these days, but kids in a buggy can. They can reach down and pick out. That's buggy level marketing, that is. So it's not just sweets at the checkout, which we've been working on for years, but sweets at floor level, I think, is another. Because what does it do? Child picks up a handful, and you've got an argument on your hands, haven't you? You've got a row. You've got parent versus child, which should have been public health versus corporate, but it's parent versus child here. Okay, a little bit more on language. I was very amused to come across some alternative definitions for the 4 Ps of marketing. Product, price, place, and promotion are the well-known 4 Ps that you and I might use. But companies really don't like the word product. They much prefer the word solution. They're offering you something you really can't do without. Price, well, price, as we heard from Michael, isn't really price. It's about value. It's added value. We're giving you more than you would have got. Place, well, that's quite simple. That's just giving you access. Aren't you lucky? And promotion. Well, promotion isn't advertising. Ooh, dear, no, it's information. So keep your eye on the language. The language is hugely important in all of these discussions. I'm just going to finish with a little bit, and then we'll have a few minutes where I hope you'll give me some more examples. A little bit about outside Britain, outside Europe, creating new markets. What's going on? Patty will tell you about how companies are very happy to do what they can to replace healthy food with unhealthy food. That's the classic photo of the 2 babies, one bottle-fed, one breastfed. But they're doing it in infant and child food now. They're doing what they can to replace what might have been healthy food at local level with these international commercialized, highly promoted products. So Nestlé, particularly, where it recognizes it's quite difficult to make a profit out of very poor people, they're going in for fortification, and they will then sell their sweetened milk powder, Milo, because it's got fortification in it, it's got extra nutrients in it. And they will produce little sort of 3-cent packs that they can easily sell. Here's the promotional woman for Maggi stock cubes. Actually, I think that's also a Nestlé product. But and the message there, you can't read it. 19 billion iodine-enriched Maggi bouillon cubes are sold in Central and West Africa each year. Basically, it's a little box of salt with a few added nutrients that you then put in your water and cheap noodles to make it tasty. That's not healthy food. That, if anything, is encouraging a much worse diet. So, be careful what the companies are saying they're doing. They call this shared value. It's not shared value at all. It's their value. Nestlé, bless it, is quite happy to publicize something that I think is very invidious and a good example of what they're really getting up to. This is their floating supermarket, which is traveling up the Amazon to reach places that have never been seen a retailer before. And if you sort of know your history of the conquistadors of Latin America who brought their syphilis and measles and decimated the local people with their Western diseases, or European diseases. And now we get Nestlé bringing European disease up the Amazon in the form of the products. Now, hopefully they will be selling, stuff you couldn't get up the Amazon, seafood perhaps, or at least lean meat from the Brazil elsewhere or something like that. But oh dear, no, it's all packaged food. It's biscuits, it's confectionery, it's soft drinks, it's a whole load of infant formula, follow-on formula. It's biscuits. It's biscuits. It's biscuits. This is in the ship. This is the floating supermarket, visiting the villages up the Amazon, creating markets that weren't there before. The other trick they're trying is little local sales suppliers. So you sign up to Nestle, you get a loan from Nestle, and they will provide your little cart, and you can go around the low-income neighborhoods with your cart, selling to families with these sorts of products. They actually tell you what's in the package that you sign up to. And they're all processed foods, biscuits, soft drinks, cake. Oh, some noodles, okay. Something savory. Wow.
They're advertising for obesity, actually, in the ad.
Well, yes, that's pretty, you know, yeah, I'm not going to comment on shapes and weights. I don't know anything about obesity. But I do know what companies are doing, and I don't like it. These are micro-distribution centers. What are they distributing? You can just see in the corner there the logo. And Coca-Cola has done a whole thing about its Millennium Development Goals, how it's been helping boost the economy in rural areas with these micro-distribution centers. So this guy comes with his boxes and loads up, goes off and sells them, makes a few cents. Perhaps after a few months he can afford one of these, much more sophisticated tricycles with an even larger capacity for going around the local areas selling, guess what? And then if he does really well. Yeah, and that is economic development. Be careful, that is economic development. Public health out the window, but economic development, great. And that's what Coca-Cola will tell you. And they've been particularly good at setting up little local stalls run by women. And then they're talking about women's empowerment. Whoa. Okay, I think I've said enough, because I'd like to hear what examples of language and food, policy, language, and framing that you've had.